take an adult timeout with Mark Anderson. We have an expert today in how to take a timeout as an adult. Now, when we're kids, we always thought that a timeout was like punishment. But see, as an adult, we realize that the timeout is a reward. In fact, it's necessary for our health development, especially those of us sensitive people. So I have asked Mark Anderson from St. Pete Salt Works to come and talk to us about the power of taking a timeout in a meaningful way. And I've known him for a long time. And every time I have a conversation with Mark, I am inspired. So I said, please come on the show with us. And so he's here with us today from St. Pete Salt Works. Mark, thank you so much for coming to the show and being part of Someone Gets Me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to have some conversations with you.
Oh, this is going to be great because I think taking a time out is so important. And you have a specific way that you like to take a time out, and you have this really amazing float project that you're doing. So talk about the benefit of taking a time out, especially for sensitive people or gifted people, people that have like the extra empathic kind of thing. Like, what's the importance and why would we want to take a time out anyway?
Yeah, now more than ever, it speaks volumes to the masses as far as, releasing or removing yourself from this environment. If you brought any stress into 2020 and then 2020 happened, that cup is overflowing now. So, it's really just a place to make the world go away for an hour. And there's a lot behind the scenes that happens when you do that. Like you said, as an adult, as a child, timeout's no bueno, not good. But as an adult, oh my God, they're so beautiful. And it's giving yourself that chance to just process. And that's my biggest thing. I go in there and I have a time to just process, what's next, and just kind of, be with your own thoughts. And sometimes it takes some practice, but once you realize what you can do in there, it's pretty cool way to spend an hour.
Oh, yes. I love it. So we're talking about a flotation therapy or sensory deprivation tanks, as some people call them, though Mark's place is not a tank in that way. So share a little bit about what flotation therapy is and how come it is really a benefit for those of us who are just getting so bombarded with stuff all the time.
Sure. Yeah. So we've really created an environment more than anything else. We do that in these beautiful float rooms. I really kind of wrapped a spa around the sensory deprivation experience, mainly to take the scare out of it. So people are able to get comfortable and feel safe in that restricted environment. But really, flotation therapy is all about removing as much of the external inputs to the nervous system as you're comfortable with. So we do that with 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt. That's going to put you in that zero gravity state. The water is the same temperature as your skin. It's skin receptor neutral. So we're removing the sense of touch as well. And those two by themselves are, large inputs of data that you probably haven't been able to remove since you've been in the womb. So we're putting you in a very womb-like state and taking away big chunks of data to have your brain and your body process. And then the room itself is soundproof and lightproof to an extent. So if you want to get that full sensory experience, you're in control of the lights at all times. There's some cool fiber optic lights up in the ceiling. There's some lights under the water. There's some music as well to begin and end the session. But that space in the middle, after everything fades away, you can successfully remove gravity, touch, light, sound, all those worldly things. And your operating system will thank you for that. And it is that reduction of inputs that kind of, you're still processing, but it doesn't have to worry about the environmental inputs or any of that. So you're able to really go to a very restful, reparative state. So there's a lot of science behind what goes on in there, but it's a very, very cool place to go for a little bit.
Oh, I love it. I know that whenever I go and float, it's a joy to turn off my phone, but it's a bigger joy to be in total darkness and feel that zero gravity in the water. That's the same temperature, like you're saying. It's like, wow, I open my eyes, close my eyes, open my eyes, close my eyes, and it's the same. And I think this is so cool. And I always come out blissful and happy. So can you share a little bit? I know there's so much research, but share a little bit about the science behind what it does to our brain. Like, how come I can go in kind of in my day and
Yeah.
come out like I'm floating on a cloud, totally calm in an hour?
Yeah, I heard someone sometimes say you come out float drunk, which is kind of a silly thing to say. But if I've floated thousands of people, and when people come down the hallway and their eyes are half closed, they're kind of fumbling around a little bit. I'm like, they made it to that happy place.
Uh-huh.
So as far as what happens in there, that reduction of inputs, you really are almost forced out of that fight or flight response. You're processing your environment afterwards at a slower rate. And that's, what I noticed, why I opened a float center was that after my third float, that drive home, I realized that I was processing things a little bit slower. I was able to really kind of, everything was easier for me to take in, if you will. And, they put one of these at a brain research institute, and they started plugging people in to kind of see what happens cognitively when people go into that kind of reduced brain state, and that's known as theta. So we're really letting you spend some more time in theta state, and that's that space when your brain is coming awake and going to sleep, that space in between awake and asleep. And a lot of people, right when you wake up, you kind of sometimes get some kind of creative ideas. You're thinking, you're operating at a different brain state, and that's what fascinates me. That's I'm really going deep into the cognitive benefits of floating, and we've talked a little bit about flow states, and I think when you're in that space where your body is processing things differently, and when you come out, it has that very cool lingering effect. And the more you float, the more you can kind of label that and see how you're responding to your environment afterwards. That that stress response is definitely being affected by spending some time without that crazy world out there.
Right. So it gives your system the much needed timeout or break, as we refer to it. So share with everybody a little bit of your backstory. How did you even get involved or find floating? Like, it's really amazing.
Yeah.
But how did you get to start all this?
Yeah. So, I used to make maps for the military. So what that means is I really get to sit in a cubicle with 3D glasses on and map the world. And it was beautiful. It was really cool. I traveled the world on a computer. I'm grateful for the time I got to spend doing that. But once you kind of, we have these long projects. They could be a 3-year project. So once you realize what you're doing, kind of put it on autopilot, much like life, then you get into those habits. But this is a good habit. You realize what you're doing. You just set it and forget it. So I got to fill my head with all kinds of things that I was interested in. And so I filled myself with some really cool books. At this particular time, my wife was pregnant with our little one, who's 10 now. So we're talking about 10 years ago. And I was really excited about child development and how the brain, how we're creating this creature. And at the same time, I always want to take my mapping background and kind of tie it into brain mapping. Still, that's a long goal that I'm still kind of going towards. But just fascinated by the brain and development. I also listen to podcasts, one of which was Joe Rogan. He had those nice long form conversations with lots of cool people, introduced me to a lot of new people, and one of which was Flotation Therapy. He had such a great way of eloquently talking about what it is. He had one personally, and we talked a lot about it, and it really sparked an interest to me. And then life happened. I actually wrote in my BlackBerry. That's how long ago it was. I wrote in my BlackBerry, someday I'm going to open a float center. And I still have that BlackBerry with that note on it. But then life happened. I got laid off. I ended up moving to Melbourne, Florida. And when we moved there, I realized that there was a float center that had just opened up. So I'm like, yes, I'm going there. And I had that first float. It blew my mind. I'm like, why isn't everyone doing this? This is, there's a lot of cool stuff going on there. And at the same time, I was working with a lot of military folks that were coming to and from tours. So I saw a lot of the way people were dealing with some PTSD. At a very personal level. And so I just started floating regularly, started introducing it to people that were around me and kind of talking to them afterwards. And they're like, whoa, there's something going on there. Well, what's going on? So I really started to research and realize that this is what I want to do. So my wife and I came back to St. Pete and started the journey. And, here we are 10 years later. These aren't everywhere because they're like 3 salty children that need constant maintenance. And I'm excited to be here, and I'm still learning more about what happens in there, and I'm excited to be part of the research, kind of moving forward, and kind of that educational component to kind of tell people to hop in there. It's not going to hurt, but it might help.
Right. And so have you ever had anybody come out with one of those kind of like, I'm getting out of here early, I can't take it, and run, and like, like running, afraid of being in that kind of a calm state, like almost where it was too much too quick? Has that ever happened?
Man, like I've said, I've floated thousands of people, and so many less people than I thought would. I'm like, I'll give someone an intro, and they're kind of looking around, and they're like, "What do you mean? There's no lights or anything?" I'm like, yeah, you just kind of breathe through it, and I give them some techniques, and I'm like, they'll be out in 20 minutes. And next thing you know, an hour's up, I'm flashing the lights. I'm banging on things. I'm like, it's time to go. But yeah, I thought there would be a lot more because it's so new to this area. There's a lot of people that, they're people's first float experiences. But yeah, every once in a while, you get people that they just can't turn it off. Or if you have too much caffeine too, and that brain is just going a million miles an hour, it's kind of hard to turn it all the way down.
Oh, yes. You just reminded me, because you tell people not to have caffeine before you come. Mm-hmm. And so one time I was coming at 2:00 in the afternoon after lunch, and I got caught out to lunch with my friend, and it was raining. So she goes, let's have some coffee. And I'm like, well, one cup of coffee won't hurt, but I got to float later. So, one won't hurt, because I hadn't had any coffee that whole day. And it was a completely different experience. It didn't wreck it, but I'm like, sure, I will never have caffeine in the same day again, because it was harder to get to that theta state.
Sure.
And I'm like laughing, going, Mark wasn't kidding when he said, don't have caffeine before you come. That was a wise comment. And because caffeine will hijack your ability to relax.
That's very true. Yeah. But at the same time, I've also had, someone will cancel, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to jump in there. And I just had a cold brew from next door at a great coffee shop. It's really hard having a really good coffee shop right next door when I'm telling people no caffeine. But what I did was I was able to get really creative. So I kind of went in there with a different idea of what I was going in there for. I was going in there with a particular situation, and I was able to find different solutions to that. So it was really cool. I actually, I've been able to utilize, floats at different brain states, if it's, right, instead of sleep or with a lot of caffeine. But it's, each one is a little different, but you just kind of have to know that going in. And I have a lot of practice.
Yes, you do have a lot of practice. I know that there's been times where I fall right asleep, or it seems like I fall asleep, and other times I just hang out in that theta state. And sometimes I'm kind of wide awake, stretching, breathing, and just enjoying it. Like, sure, everyone's a different experience. And I think that's valuable. So how does floating help somebody with anxiety? Like, a lot of gifted people have a lot of anxiety. Some of it is anxiousness, and some of it is just smart, gifted people tend to vibrate a little higher. And so how does it help with anxiety?
Yeah, I've dealt with a lot of anxiety. Being a new entrepreneur and owning a business now, I'm dealing with a lot more things, if you will. Yeah, I've practiced a lot of breath work in there, and that kind of, sometimes you need to add something to your float, if it's breath work or if it's some journaling to try to get some of your thoughts out on paper, that slowing it down so you're able to kind of process differently. But it's still that reduction of inputs, that that fight or flight response, a way of kind of getting going away for a little bit while you're floating. I think it really is the environment. A lot of the environmental inputs are causing a lot of that stress. So if you just go in there, if you breathe, if you count from 100 backwards, and if you ever get distracted, you start back up again. I tell people some of these different tricks, and I've utilized them myself, but it's amazing what happens about halfway through. A lot of people, because your brain's kind of leveling down, and all of a sudden time gets slippery. You don't really know if you've been in it for 10 minutes or for 2 days. Then all of a sudden, you forget that you're worrying about something. So your brain kind of just wanders off without your body into a place where, if you're able to drive that thought, and, I think it goes very well with a lot of talk therapy too. I've always say, it's a place to process. So if you're taking anything in there with you, if it's a meditative practice, if it's any kind of, even if it's some any breath work, anything like that really does help people settle it down. Floating by itself with that much reduction of inputs, you'll get there. It might take a little bit longer. I always tell people, try to get to that third float. I'm always offering these really good deals for 3 floats, because that first one is going to be pretty cool, but so many new experiences. The second one, you're like, all right, I know what to expect. By that third one, you're like, all right, I can get in there. I can feel comfortable. It's really, I'm trying more than anything else to provide a place where you can feel safe enough to create from. And I think that's a great way to kind of, let people understand what it is and what it isn't. Don't overhype it, and just realize that I'm just removing the world. But the world is what's causing a lot of us to kind of go through these stressful, loops or habits. And, I'm working on myself. I'm always in the work myself, and passing along what I learned on my journey.
Right. And I think it's important, like, to take these adult timeouts. That's
Yes.
why
Back to the timeouts.
I
For
think
sure.
it's so important. So what's the difference between your setting and the pods? Like, everybody goes, oh, you go to float pod. I go, no. This is a little different, even though I've been in the float pods.
Sure.
What's the difference, and how come you chose the style you have? And if you're willing or whatever, maybe you can take us in there and show us, but that's kind of up to you.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. So it's kind of funny. I'd only floated in pods. I'd floated, before there was one in St. Pete, I'd go, an hour south or an hour up over to Orlando, or in Melbourne, where we used to live, and those were all pods. And my wife, who also is dealing with a lot of mental things, and she's like, that sounds great. This is gonna be great, but I'm not getting one of those pods. So, and I'd never floated in a room. So, and then I really wanted to design one to make it as acceptable or as accessible to as many people as I could. My mom and my wife both were 2 people that loved the idea, understood what it was, but did not like the idea of closing a lid over you. But once you kind of get past that, the way I say, I'm like, go find a float center near you and give it a try. And if float centers are highly regulated, as long as it's clean and safe place to check out, jump in there. Float rooms that we did regular ceiling height. I left the user in control of the lights at all times. Those were 2 elements. I wanted to make sure that, you can kind of ease yourself into the full sensory experience, or leave the lights on at all times. That's always up to you. And it's a lot harder to build rooms than it is to just buy an appliance and plug it in. And I've had good and bad floats in pods. I think the biggest difference is it's a much smaller space. And with all the water and everything being, you're trying to get both the air and the water very similar. So sometimes it gets a little stuffy in there. And it is there's a lid that's usually a little bit higher than you. But yeah, I think once people get to that third float, and if they have to kind of leave a pod cracked a little bit, or if you have to leave a tank door open, but I'm like, don't matter where you go, just jump in there. When the dark is the same in all of them. And if you have to adjust your environment a little bit to make sure it's comfortable, but by all means, I built these in a way to make it as accessible to anybody. But after people get to all my members, like, oh, would you like room 1, the Cadillac? It feels a little bit bigger than the other 2. They're like, I don't care, just put me in. But yeah, that's, we built them for that reason. A lot of personal reasons, but yeah.
Well, and interestingly, I've brought people to your place, and we put them in room 1 because it is bigger. It's got a little bit more space. And then after the first few floats, and they realize that it's safe and that everything's really taken care of and controlled behind the scenes in a way where you really can let go, then they get a lot more free about whatever room they're in or whatever. So
Sure,
that
yeah.
safety is so very important.
Yes.
And taking care of things. So what do you see for the future moving forward? Like, okay, so we're in the middle of COVID. You've been an anchor in our community of really supporting people dealing with the stress and healing in this major time of turmoil and transition. You've been an anchor totally the whole time. So what do you see moving forward for you, for St. Pete Saltworks, for floating in general? How do you see it just being part of the overall like wellness, especially for us gifted people that are like really sensitive?
Yeah, no, I couldn't be more excited about where this industry is going and how important it is for mental health. They put one of these at a brain research institute. They're really starting to do the studies, and they have the funding to do the long-term studies needed to be covered by insurance. I'm not too concerned about that, but that's big steps that they're making in the understanding of what happens in that environment. So that's really, really cool. I'm excited to see that happen. And we've been here for a couple of years. I'm really excited about developing more programs and working with people like yourself and kind of developing more programs where floating and blank. If it's floating and talk therapy, floating, we're doing a lot of work with the VA. Starting to get some traction with, being a research facility, combining USF, our local university, along with some brain mapping and really kind of taking things that I'm excited about, including them and doing research for the industry. But really also kind of, giving people the opportunity to wrap whatever you can around that float experience. If it's like a 6 weekly floats and a program, if it's guided meditation, they bring you through, kind of that float school, if you will. I always had a cool idea of kind of, you'll be able to graduate from a space where, if you're floating weekly and you're doing like an 8-week sessions, you're going to come out of that 8 weeks, no matter what you're working on, different, if you're using the floating as a tool. Another thing that excites me and that I really want to somehow incorporate in is the fact that they put one of these at the Navy SEALs training facility, and they utilize it for super learning, for learning new languages when they have to go in new missions. So there's a lot that happens in that theta state, and this environment is hard to reproduce anywhere unless you're going back to the womb, which is not as easy. So it's it's a really neat environment, and I'm excited to kind of see how we can kind of develop some programs with that, and it'll become with some partnerships with other people. Kind of more or less a place to process. But it's exciting to kind of see where this is going, and that's what I would like to do. Really kind of, like I said, have those programs, have that, they're the innovation district. I'm excited about working with them, and like when you mentioned those, the creativity that can happen in there is really, really neat too. I've redesigned float centers. I've built subdivisions. I didn't even know I was a subdivision developer, but I'll come out of there with all these crazy ideas. And it's just what happens when you have more brain power, without all the processing that's needed from the environment. And, I keep going back to that, but I think that's a lot of what's going on in there. So I'm excited about that.
Right. And like the brilliant ideas or the inspiration doesn't have to fight through all the static to be heard.
Sure. That's very big. Yeah.
You can hear what's really going on that is inspiring or motivational or whatever it is. It's trying to get out. But, when there's so many things happening, so much static, I call it, then
static. That's a good term. I like that.
It makes it tricky, or can make it tricky.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you see in your visionary self? Because you're a visionary, right? And you came up with this really cool idea and plan and brought it to a town that didn't even have it really. And now people talk about it. And so you're creating a road for people to be able to experience life more rich, more full, more alive, and in a way that is user-friendly, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you grow and change and evolve and you keep expanding your creativity, do you see yourself opening other centers or expanding this one, or what?
Yeah,
do you see that?
Of course. Yeah. So kind of my goal number one into next year is I really want to be open 24/7 availability. That is working with those first responders, working with shift workers at the hospitals. I've had so many rewarding stories from RNs from right across the street at our local hospital here, where it's, that back to that adult timeout, and trying to process, that high level, high adrenaline work and kind of turning it off, so you can deal with regular world things. Having some of those people understand, when strangers give me hugs because they're like, I needed this so bad. I want to be here for that. So that's kind of number one. And then, I have a few different ideas at different locations, with some different programs wrapped around it. But yeah, there's a need. And I almost want to call them like rest areas, they should be at rest areas, but at the same time, there's all these cool terms. Every time I float, I think of a different way to tell to people that don't know what it is. And there's less and less people that don't know what it is if they've seen it on, the news, or, it's been on The Simpsons, it's been on Big Bang Theory, it's been on all these different shows, and people are like, hey, I saw you on. My mom's like, oh, it used to be on Frasier back in the day. It was like he had one. So it's really cool seeing it go back. And I'm reading books by John Lilly, who developed this in the 60s, and how he worked at the National Institute of Mental Health. And I'm like, I want to tie all these things back together. So, and also a lot of these old terms I'm really excited about reintroducing in a less 1960s way, if you will.
Right.
Set and setting means a lot to a lot of people from the 60s, but that's exactly what we're doing. It's a set and setting to work from altered states. I mean, we are altering your state in a very positive way so you can process differently. So I'm excited about, introducing this to a lot of people, and then, even executives trying to level up. I think there's a really cool opportunity there as well. So, and my daughter, I have a 10-year-old who I had to pay to start floating, but now she knows my elevator pitch. I might send you that video as well. At 10, I think she was 8 at the time, doing my elevator pitch in one of the rooms, talking about floating is the cutest thing ever. But yeah, working with kids and autism, kids and sensory issues, and there's a lot of opportunities there as well, I think.
So floating as a therapy is emerging or re-emerging. They tried to emerge it in the 60s as sensory deprivation tanks, they call them. And that is what it is in a way, but it sounds scary kind of.
Yeah.
And so when I tell people I'm going to go to float therapy, they're like, what?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, and then I tell them what it is, and they're like, wow. And I've introduced a lot of people to it because I think that having this timeout and having an ability to just decompress, no matter what we do with that decompression time, it's a benefit to us. And those of us who are gifted with overexcitabilities and different neurodiversity, it's required that we nurture our neuroplasticity rather than letting it get hardened by just all the input and the world and all of that kind of thing. And so can somebody float too much? Like I kid sometimes and say, I'm just moving into the back room and I'll float every day. So is it possible to do too much of this? Can you get addicted to it? Like in a negative way?
Right. Yeah, I really don't think so. I mean, you can't overfloat. I mean, I've floated daily for over a week. There's people in the float industry that have done daily floats for 30 days and they talk about how transformative that is. I love starting my day with a float. I mean, if I could, once my daughter's out of school and I have my mornings a little bit more free, I'd love to start every day with a float. Talk about, setting intentions for your day and having everything slow down a little bit so you can, process differently. It's funny, if I have a cold brew before people come in and I'm doing my regular intro, is a completely different introduction into floating than it is if it's right after I floated. I can notice the way I intro people after a float session. It's just a little bit more calculated, a little bit more honed in, and it's really neat. And I can see that and label it now that I've done it enough. I'm like, whoa, those are working from two different states for sure. And it's pretty wild. And there's people that do overnight floats. I see, Joe Dispenza is another reason I really want to do some of those longer floats. He does a lot of his long meditation retreats in the middle of the night because he's dealing with that brain when it's operating at a much lower frequency. And you can, you're doing a lot more processing than you are at any other time. So there's some cool opportunities there as well, I think. So, I'm always up for learning from other people and, all the beautiful things that you're doing as well. I'd love to, talk about what that looks like. And I'd love to learn more about your float journey or what, you could probably teach a lot of people some cool, float tricks if someone's going to first, jump in, or if we're introducing people to their, floating for the first time, and you kind of tip their tricks from a avid floater. I'm interested to hear as well.
Well, I think for me, being a gifted person with all the overexcitabilities and in an overstimulated world, when I go and I get to go float, it's like I have my bag with me with my hair conditioner because you get magnesium salt in your hair, so I have to condition my hair and all of that. And it's a time of rest and relaxation and rejuvenation. But when I notice is kind of what you were just saying about when you're doing the tour, when I leave, my brain is much more aligned with my spirit and my heart. Like my alignment is way easier to live in.
Nice.
My voice slows down. My processing doesn't slow down, and I'm able to stay focused better at the same time. So my brain always kind of moves fast, but it's much less tangential
I
and
like that.
on
It's
point.
beautiful.
And so as somebody with a lot of overexcitabilities, it's important. And I work with a lot of clients with overexcitabilities. In fact, that's all I do, the creative musician outlier type and the athletes. And so when I suggest it to them and they try it, they're like, whoa, because you finally get a break from the constant push of the world, whatever that is. And so I think it's got great value for that. I also noticed something we haven't talked about yet, but I think we both know about is the high level of magnesium in the water is absorbed into the skin. And so most Americans have magnesium deficiency, which magnesium deficiency creates heart problems, muscle spasms, constipation, and all kinds of stuff. And so when I lay there and I'm getting like an infusion of magnesium into my system, then my muscles calm down. My body is more relaxed. The old pain from the car accident and stuff is lessened, if not gone. And the minerals are replenished in my body. And most Americans, if they're not supplementing with minerals, don't have enough minerals in their body. And so a byproduct, not just the brain stuff, is there's physical manifestations of what I call like rectifying. It's not really healing because I'm not implying something's wrong. What I'm saying is that it helps rectify and balance the system. Like we were saying before we hit record, you can float for a really long time, you guys, and you don't get pruny. Like when you're in a pool for a little while and everything gets all pruny, it doesn't happen in a float tank.
No,
And
float for 8 hours, nothing.
Right. And because of the homeostasis of the minerals is friendly to the body. And so your physical being is being nourished in a way that a regular tub won't do, or a shower or whatever, because those and chlorine pools, that takes from your body, and this gives to your body. So you're nourished physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually all at the same time in a way that kind of is harmonious, right? And I think that it's a necessary, wonderful thing for gifted people, for creative people, for anybody really who wants to grow and change, but especially the people that have neurodiversity to the point where they're sensitive to their environment, where they really need to take a time out from it, take a break.
Yeah, and we really haven't really touched upon pain and how amazing it is for pain relief. There's a lot there too. I mean, we had a contract with the Rays and the Rowdies for sports recovery before this year hit, but yeah, they understood floating for recovery at a science level to where they added that to their protocol. But yeah, at the same time, the magnesium is such an important process with everything else there. But I think it's also the zero gravity as well. I think when you don't have any of that pressure points being activated from, even if you're laying down in a comfortable place and you're trying to relax, you still have those pressure points. And what I've heard recently is when you don't have all those pressure points, you're actually getting more blood flow to all your extremities because there's no restrictions. So with that blood flow is also energy and also some, your those nutrients, you're getting more, blood flow to different areas. There's some cool stuff there as well. But yeah, the pain relief. My mom has fibromyalgia. They did a study in Sweden a while back on floating fibromyalgia and some of those low-lying chronic pain conditions and how beneficial it is for that. So really, really exciting to be here for people, especially in that chronic pain. It's hard to concentrate on anything when you have that pain like that. So I've lots of rewarding stories with that as well. People just getting some, even if it's a short amount of time without having to worry about that pain, because it kind of just goes away with everything else while you're floating. And it kind of, you're able to, if you float regularly, you can, that time duration with a little bit of pain relief can be extended as well. So really, really cool to hear people go through that.
Right. So it has a cumulative effect when you do it consistently.
Yeah, those weekly floats going into next year. One of the big things I'm adding is weekly floats, and make that as affordable as I can to get people in there weekly. We have, I have 4 floats a month. That's pretty popular. And the once a month I think is a great maintenance. But if you're trying to work through anything, you can definitely those weekly floats people will start looking forward to.
Right. Oh, that's really, really, really fun. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So is there anything you wanted to share today on this podcast about floating and its benefit to the world, especially for us gifted people, that I didn't ask about? I know I covered a lot of things, and I'm glad you asked the whole pain relief and the zero gravity, because I forgot about that. Is there anything that I missed or that is on your heart that you want to make sure you share?
Yeah, no, I was excited to talk to you just because I know your background and I know you're a regular floater, and it's always good to kind of get that other perspective and understanding. And no, you hit pretty much all the points that I was interested in covering. Outside of just to, again, reiterate, for mental health, I'm excited to be here, and I'm always talking to people. If anyone's interested in what floating looks like when combined with what they're working on, we have a massage therapist here because the float massage combo is fantastic. Chiropractors say, after a float, it's like working on a child. So they're so malleable and so warmed up and loosened up. It's great. It goes well with many different things. So, and I'm all about partnerships. We partner with our local yoga studio. So, if you're a member there, you get to float at our member rates. So, I just want to be here for our community and be part of the research moving forward as well. So I'm excited about dumbing it down to saying, hey, you need an adult timeout, or taking it deep into what is going on in the brain, so I'm all about all things float related, and I get excited when we talk brain related things and what's going on there. So, I'm always learning and floating through it. That's my other line. Let's just float through it.
We'll float through it. But I love the adult timeout, because that's kind of what I feel like sometimes, like, oh, I need a timeout. And so I have my regular appointments to come float. And it's changed my life for the better on multiple levels. And so if you're listening to Mark and you're like really curious and you don't have any floating areas around you, or you're not sure what to do or what it all means, all of his contact information is in the show notes. So you can reach out to him, because one thing I know about Mark is he will answer you and he will support you, because he is a service leader. He is somebody who is leading in their community, but he cares about people and he wants to serve. So you feel free to reach out to him and tell him I said so. And that'll be totally cool, because he knows we are on the same wavelength, because it's important. It's important that we all seize the opportunity to rectify whatever's not working, to grow and expand in ways that are healthy and safe and compassionate. And floating is one of those things that can do that for us. It can give all of us a sense of safety, a place to process things where we do not have to be afraid. And it's important.
Yes.
So
Indeed.
we have an ally in that, in Mark. And whether you're in St. Petersburg or not, you could be anywhere in the world. This podcast is everywhere. You can still email him and he'll still answer you and support you on your journey.
Absolutely.
And that I know. So your final question of the day is, and I know you listen to this podcast, so you probably know what it is already. And that is, we have a billboard that we're going to put up that the whole world is going to see with Mark's message on it. What's the message?
Yeah, I thought about that one. And at first I was going to say, go float yourself. But then I thought about it and I'm like, I want someone to think about what that billboard said 2 exits down the road. So I'm going to change it to, how was your float?
How was your float? Yeah. That's a
like,
great
what
one.
are they talking about? How's I float? I should probably go float. So I answer that question.
Right. How was your float? Oh, I love that one. And you would be thinking about it 2 exits down the road. I would think about, well, which float? Because they're all different.
Wait, for floating?
Right, exactly. Well, you've been listening to Mark Anderson from St. Pete Saltworks, who is a pioneer, who is a light bearer, is one of those people bringing in something amazing into our culture for the sports people, the first responders, us gifted people, kids, everybody can benefit in different ways from a float therapy. So if you don't have it in your area, seek it out someplace so you can try it out. Like he said, give it 3 times at least to get
Yes.
started, and contact him from the show notes, and make sure that you remember that you have the right to be safe and to process things. So, Mark, thank you so much for being on Someone Gets Me today and sharing some of our really cool brain things and all of those other great things about floating, and being willing to be part of this mission of bringing hope to people that there is a way to keep growing and expanding in a healthy, safe way. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So nice talking with you.
Okay, everybody, remember to keep your face to the sun so the shadows fall behind you, because you're a rock star. You're here on purpose with a purpose. So go out there and allow your light to shine. Be that lighthouse for others. And in that moment, you light up your own world. So until the next episode of Someone Gets Me, be well.